You are standing barefoot on cold stone in a courtyard you don't recognize. Your hands are still black with ash from a fire that took everything 3 days ago. The children you carried for months, raised with trembling hope, they're already gone, buried under rubble you'll never see again. Above you, Sparta is silent, not peaceful. Silent the way a predator goes still before it strikes. 31 women stand beside you in perfect rows, uncounted but measured, and you realize with creeping horror, they're not guarding you because they don't need to. I'm always stunned. This story reaches everywhere from Seoul to Mexico City. Drop a comment from wherever you are. I'm genuinely curious who else can't look away from this. The year is 425 BCE. The place is a city that turned children into weapons and made cruelty a virtue. You don't know it yet, but you're standing in the center of Sparta, the most feared city-state in ancient Greece. Your husband died 3 days ago at the Battle of Sparta. He was an Athenian officer, a strategist, a man who kissed your forehead before he left and promised he'd return. He didn't. None of them did. And now you're here. Not as a prisoner of war in the way you understand it, as something worse. Something the Spartans don't even have a word for because they've done this so many times they don't need one. But what happened next broke every rule you thought civilizations followed. A man approaches from the far end of the courtyard. His crimson cloak drags behind him like a wound. He doesn't introduce himself. His authority is in the way every Spartan woman stops moving when he passes. When he speaks, his voice is dry, stripped of anything human. You are no longer Athenians, he says. You are no longer wives. The words land like stones, final, irreversible. Before dawn, someone in this courtyard would make a choice that condemned her to a fate historians still can't fully document. A letter, written in blood-soaked bandages, would surface in a monastery 400 years later. And the last woman standing would be the one nobody expected to survive. Her name was Melina. She was 26 years old. In 3 days, she'd learned that survival in Sparta didn't mean living it, meant becoming useful. And usefulness had a price she couldn't yet imagine. The Spartan women step forward with movements so practiced they seem choreographed. They separate the group into clusters of 8, leading them toward different stone buildings that ring the courtyard. No voices are raised. Instructions are given in glances, in the tilt of a head, in gestures so small they're almost invisible. Melina walks with her eyes lowered, counting her steps. She's already learned the first rule of this place. Thinking too loudly is dangerous. The building they lead her into smells faintly of clean water and something metallic she can't identify. There are no chains, no screams. That absence unsettles her more than either would have. A woman waits beside a stone table and a clay vessel, her face showing neither curiosity nor cruelty, just function. When the woman speaks, her tone is flat, rehearsed, the voice of someone who has done this task so many times emotion has been sanded away. She asks questions. Melina answers them. Age, health, cycles. Background reduced to data points on a wax tablet. Melina understands without being told. Resistance won't stop this process. It will only make it slower and more painful. She answers each question in a steady voice, as if every response buys a few more seconds of something resembling control. The woman marks symbols onto the tablet. She doesn't explain what they mean. In Sparta, knowledge belongs to those who govern, not to those being categorized. When it's finished, Melina is led to a shared room where other women sit in silence. Some stare at the floor. Others study the walls as if searching for cracks that don't exist. No one speaks. Silence becomes a shared language, a form of mutual protection. That night, food and water arrive. Enough, carefully measured, not generous, not cruel calculated. Melina notices the precision and understands something crucial. This isn't careless brutality, it's selective care. What's useful is preserved. Everything else is expendable. And she is now a resource. The doctor who evaluated them the next morning wasn't trying to heal them. He was determining their yield. At dawn, Melina wakes before anyone calls for her. Her body stayed tense through the night, alert, as if it learned in a single darkness that complete rest is a luxury she can no longer afford. Light enters through a narrow opening high in the wall. It offers no view of the outside. Sparta offers no views, only functions. The evaluations continue. Another room, another stone table, another set of questions, more invasive this time, framed with the clinical detachment of a livestock inspection. The older woman returns with a younger assistant. There's no hurry. There's no pause. Everything unfolds with the calm precision of a ritual repeated across generations. Data is recorded. Cycles are noted. Backgrounds reduced to marks on wax. Melina answers without protest because she's understood the second rule. Neither consent nor resistance is required here. Only cooperation. When the tablet fills with markings once more, Melina senses something final has occurred. She hasn't been judged. She hasn't been condemned. She's been classified. As she's led from the room, she hears muffled sounds drifting from behind other doors. No words, just restrained emotion pressed through stone. Sparta doesn't require shouts to impose its will. Control is exercised through anticipation. Each woman imagines her own fate, and that private imagining is more effective than any explicit threat. Back in the courtyard, Melina studies the architecture with new awareness. Everything here is built to endure, not to comfort. The stones aren't beautiful, but they last. Sparta doesn't construct to please. It constructs to remain. The same principle applies to people. To understand what's about to happen to Melina, you need to step backward in time. Centuries earlier, Sparta conquered fertile land it couldn't govern without constant anxiety. The subjugated population was large, persistent, impossible to fully absorb. They lived beside their conquerors, working the soil, preserving memory and resentment. From that moment, Sparta learned a lesson that would define it forever. Survival depends on control, not consensus, not persuasion. Control, this need reshaped every aspect of Spartan life. Childhood became preparation. Family yielded to the collective. Affection became a liability. Anything that didn't reinforce dominance was reduced or removed entirely. The body ceased to belong to the individual. It became a resource managed by the state. Over time, that management was praised as virtue. Spartans learned not to doubt, not to question, not to require explanation. Doubt was a crack through which chaos could enter. Critical thinking was replaced by ritual. Ritual hardened into habit. And when a practice becomes habit, it stops appearing cruel. It simply is. The training Sparta imposed on its children sought more than strong bodies. It sought minds that couldn't hesitate. From early childhood, obedience was taught without question, endurance without complaint. This wasn't punishment, it was conditioning. Every deprivation, every test was designed to erase a specific response: empathy. Over time, this produced men who required no explicit orders. They knew what was expected because the system had replaced their internal compass entirely. They no longer distinguished between right and wrong. They distinguished between useful and useless. And in the shadow of this training existed a final stage reserved for those who'd proven they could act without internal restraint. It was never discussed openly, only hinted at through euphemism, as if naming it directly might fracture the order it upheld. A space where obedience was perfected. Where actions occurred without witnesses, without questions, without the friction of conscience. Melina doesn't know its details, but she senses its presence like pressure in the air before a storm. The women whisper at night fragments of stories, unconfirmed accounts. In Sparta, fear rarely requires proof. Possibility is enough. The woman who enters Melina's room doesn't present herself as a guard. She presents herself as an intermediary. Her name is Gorgo. She's young, strong, her posture reflecting years of physical discipline that wasn't optional. She offers no comfort, only information. In Sparta, that's the closest thing to courtesy. Gorgo explains in short, measured sentences. The evaluations are complete. The marks have been reviewed. Melina has been deemed suitable for a domestic assignment, not as an equal. Not as a guest, but as part of a secondary household structure designed to fulfill a specific need of the state. Every phrase has been rehearsed, passed down from woman to woman across generations. Other outcomes exist for those who fail to meet criteria, Gorgo says without elaboration. She doesn't need to. The silence surrounding those alternatives is louder than any description. In Sparta, what isn't named is often what's most feared. If you cooperate, you will live. Gorgo continues plainly. If you don't, you will be reassigned. There's no threat in her voice, only fact. And Melina realizes something unsettling. Spartan women don't see themselves as victims. They don't see themselves as oppressors. They see themselves as necessary, as the only thing standing between order and chaos. They've internalized the system so completely they can't imagine existing outside it. When Gorgo rises to leave, she adds one sentence. Tomorrow, you will know your placement. The man waiting in the courtyard doesn't move as Melina approaches. He stands with a stillness that isn't passive, but alert, predatory. He's not young, but his body retains the density of decades of training. His face shows no curiosity, no impatience, only evaluation. His name is Cleomenes. She knows it from the way women adjust their posture in his presence, from the subtle shift that follows men accustomed to authority without announcement. He's a full citizen, someone who endured every stage of the system and survived. In Sparta, that alone confers power. Cleomenes speaks without warmth. He doesn't mention feelings or expectations. He speaks of continuity, inheritance, domestic stability. Words that sound administrative, almost neutral, as if discussing the transfer of property rather than the architecture of a life. Melina answers carefully. She's neither submissive nor defiant. She's learned that extremes invite suspicion. She speaks plainly, without ornament, mirroring Spartan restraint. The adjustment is noticed. Cleomenes inclines his head slightly. In Sparta, the smallest gesture can signal acknowledgement. In the days that follow, Melina notices a pattern. The nights are predictable, mechanical, transactional, but the days are not. Cleomenes returns at irregular hours. He sits in the courtyard and speaks not of emotions, but of tactics, harvests. The martial versus Sparta permits as its only poetry. At first, Melina listens in silence. Then, cautiously, she begins to ask questions, not challenges. Details, practical clarifications. Contradictions framed as technical concerns. Cleomenes responds with rigidity at first, then with something else, interest. Speaking with her doesn't require the mask he wears among other men. Cleomenes is surrounded by soldiers, yet cannot speak freely. Melina, by contrast, doesn't count in the social order. She's foreign, she's property. Therefore, paradoxically, she's safe to talk to. That safety becomes dangerous. Each conversation adds weight to a relationship the system never anticipated. Cleomenes lingers longer, listens more closely, responds with more than rehearsed phrases. It's not affection, not yet. It's recognition. And in Sparta, recognizing the humanity of another person is the first step toward transgression. But the city is watching, always watching. The summons arrives without warning. Two men escort Melina through streets she recognizes, not through familiarity, but through repetition. Sparta doesn't change. That's its promise and its threat. As they pass, women pause in their tasks. They look, they calculate. No one asks where Melina is being taken. In this city, questions are a form of defiance. The chamber where the ephors wait is austere, even by Spartan standards. No symbols, no decoration. 5 seats arranged in a semicircle, one opposite them, reserved for those who must answer. Melina sits when instructed. Her posture is straight, her expression calm. She's learned that visible fear is free information. The E4s speak with the same tone they'd use to discuss any civic matter. They note that time is passing, that expected results haven't yet appeared. There's no reproach in their voices, only calculation. Then they mention a request, a name Melina has heard whispered, always quietly, always followed by silence. Lysander. They don't explain who he is. The weight of the name makes its significance clear. The request, they say, is unusual. It doesn't promise continuity. It doesn't ensure stability. It carries risk to what the city currently values in her. And yet, it's supported by influence. For the first time since arriving in Sparta, Melina is offered what they call a choice. Accept the request and assume its consequences. Refuse and accelerate the demands placed on her current assignment. This isn't a moral decision. It's a transfer of responsibility. Whatever happens, the city remains blameless. Melina recognizes the trap immediately. There is no real choice. Both paths lead to loss, just by different routes. But she also recognizes something else. The fact that she's been consulted at all means her status has shifted. She's no longer entirely expendable, not yet secure, but no longer invisible. She answers without raising her voice. She chooses to remain where she is. She chooses the path she understands, however narrow it may be. The E4s nod as if this response confirms an expectation. They remind her that time continues to move, that the city is watching. Then she's dismissed. No ceremony. No farewell. That night, when Melina returns to Cleomenes's house, she knows the margin for error has shrunk to nothing. Her survival no longer depends solely on obedience or comprehension. It depends on anticipation, on creating a future the system can't ignore. For the first time, she begins to think not only about enduring Sparta, but about shifting its balance in ways she never imagined possible. Cleomenes enters that night changed. He's been informed not of everything, but enough to understand that the equilibrium they found is fragile. They speak little. The silence carries more weight than words. Finally, Cleomenes says what neither can avoid. The margin has narrowed. The city doesn't wait forever. Melina listens without interruption. She cannot afford passivity anymore. That night, she acts differently. Not in submission, but in calculated participation. She doesn't attempt deception. She accelerates what the city already demands, understanding with brutal clarity that her body has become her argument. And delaying that argument would be surrender. The consultations that follow are clinical, relentless, adjustments, recommendations delivered as technical instruction. Melina follows each precisely not from blind obedience, but because she understands every action is evidence. Cleomenes, meanwhile, begins to change in ways others notice. He's more present, more attentive, not only in the household but in public. He defends his investment using language the system respects: efficiency, resources, future value. He doesn't speak of Melina as a person. He speaks of her as an asset. The protection is imperfect, but it's real. As pressure builds, Melina arrives at a realization that turns fear into resolve. Survival won't come from compliance alone. It will come from creating dependence. It's not enough to be useful once. She must become indispensable. While the city waits for results, Melina begins to think beyond the present. She sees the future not as a destination, but as a sequence of moves. And then, in the 4th month, something shifts. The consultations stop. The scrutiny eases. Not because the city has lost interest, but because it's satisfied. Melina has delivered what Sparta demanded: a continuation, a future, a justification for her existence within the machine. When the child is born, it's examined immediately, measured, evaluated. Only after passing inspection is it returned to her. Cleomenes holds the infant with a tenderness that surprises her. For a moment, the mask slips. She sees not a Spartan warrior, but a man who understands, perhaps for the first time, that he's created something the system can't fully control. A bond it didn't authorize. The city registers the birth. The records are updated. Melina's status shifts from temporary asset to permanent fixture. She's no longer expendable. She's infrastructure. Melina watched her son become a Spartan the way fire becomes ash. Inevitable, devastating. The Agoge taught him silence, endurance, obedience, yet could not quite cauterize the tenderness he saved for her alone. Cleomenes began to linger in conversation, asking questions that Sparta had trained from him like blood from a wound. They never staged a rebellion. They did something far more dangerous. They remembered. Centuries later, tourists cross the same courtyard, hearing nothing. But her son's name survives in stone, and in his campaigns, scholars find restraint. A quiet mercy that Sparta never meant to teach. Mercy where the system demanded none. You're back where we started, standing in that courtyard. But now you know why it was silent. Now you understand that what happened there wasn't an exception to Spartan values. It was their fulfillment. The city that prided itself on strength survived by devouring those it conquered. But some of those it tried to erase left marks the system couldn't measure. And if you listen carefully in that courtyard today, you can still hear the sound that haunted Melina until her final breath. Not screams, not violence, something worse. The sound of a machine that turned suffering into policy and called it virtue.